The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Europe must do the heavy lifting.
Putin is freaking out as people from all over the world are speaking up in support of Ukraine. Here in the United States, we've got congressmen and politicians from both sides, left and right, standing up saying that the United States needs to make sure that Ukraine gets the invaded territory back from Russia. On top of that, we also have a large number of Americans coming out to the streets to show their support for President Zelensky in Ukraine. Okay, now I'm going to play a clip of Democratic Senator Chris Murphy. During his appearance on CNN, he called the White House a wing of the Kremlin. Take a listen.
So it is absolutely shameful what is happening right now. The White House has become an arm of the Kremlin. Every single day you hear from the National Security Advisor, from the President of the United States, from his entire national security team, Kremlin talking points. For the last week, the White House has been pretending as if Ukraine started this war. That's essentially saying that Poland invaded Germany at the beginning of World War II. There are still facts in this world. And the fact is this: Vladimir Putin is a brutal dictator. Russia started this war. And the entire pretext for that meeting yesterday was an attempt to rewrite history in order to sign a deal with Putin that hands Putin Ukraine. That is disastrous for U.S. national security. That means that China will be on the march. Putin may not stop. America may be at war with a nuclear power. And for what? For what? It appears as if America is trying to align itself with dictators.
Anyways, moving on. Here we've got a clip of Ted Cruz, the Republican senator from Texas, clarifying how this war should actually end, and that the defeat for Russia and Putin is actually a win for American national security. Take a listen.
I think it's important that this war come to an end in a way that is a clear and unmistakable loss for Russia, a loss for Putin. I think Russia losing benefits the national security interest of the United States.
Yeah.
I got to say, by the way, Zelensky's performance was so bad that I think it not only harmed his own country, but I think it harmed world peace.
So, as you guys heard from Senator Cruz, and these are his words, not mine, he said Zelensky's performance was bad in the Oval Office. That's what he said. Now let's step back and understand one thing, that Zelensky's first language is not English. He's not fluent in English, which is why he prefers to speak in Ukrainian and usually uses a translator. However, during the Oval Office meeting with President Trump, Zelensky didn't have his translator with him, and I think that became the root cause behind this whole mess. This is where I think Vice President Vance took a bit of an offense, and even President Trump took an offense to it. Now, what happened was J.D. Vance was saying that we should be taking a diplomatic route to end the war. And in reply to that, Zelensky tried to make a point that Putin has signed multiple ceasefire agreements in the past, and he has broken all of those agreements. Zelensky was basically trying to say that Ukrainians have tried diplomacy with Russia, but it doesn't work. And after saying this, he frames the question to the vice president, asking him, "What kind of diplomacy are you speaking about, JD?" And I think that's where the whole fight actually took off. JD Vance took this question as an insult, which I think was never the intention of President Zelensky. Here I have a clip from a Ukrainian journalist explaining the whole thing perfectly.
I think he said this phrase, "What kind of diplomacy are you talking about, JD?" And I think that triggered Vice President. But this is basically English, he didn't mean it as an insult. A lot of Ukrainians would use that phrase, "What kind of something you are talking about?" And I think Ukrainians do not always understand that phrase reads as an insult or as a trigger for a lot of people. He actually followed up immediately after that by saying, "What do you mean?" But that was too late, I think.
Now, on top of all this, I think a lot of people also took offense when Zelensky referred to Vice President Vance by his name, not by his title. Take a listen.
Of factors.
People have discussed that indeed and said yes to this, and we could have seen how J.D. Vance continued to speak. Vice President J.D. Vance continued to say "Mr. President" to Zelensky, whereas this J.D. was a response or previous reference. So there's definitely a little bit of that, and there is an expectation. It was read in the room by a lot of people that the United States expected a lot of gratitude and a lot of very differential attitude. So I think there is some macho thing going on. It's like as one person said, it's just men fighting, and we shouldn't have that.
Now, of course, we can't change the past, but I really believe that this fight happened because there was no translator present at the meeting with Zelensky. Now, when you're the leader of a country and you're meeting President Trump at a point when the stakes are so high and you're in front of the whole world and all the cameras and everything like that, you don't want to get into a situation where even a single word could be misunderstood. So I think having a translator with Zelensky could have prevented this whole thing from happening, because at the end of the day, what President Zelensky was trying to say was not wrong. Since 2014, ever since the Russian invasion started, Putin has broken every single ceasefire agreement. So even though he was saying the right thing, I think everybody in the room misunderstood his tone without realizing that English wasn't his first language. Anyways, moving on, we have a video of Senator Mark Kelly stepping up for Ukraine, calling Trump a bully. Take a listen.
And then I have to say that was a mistake. I think it was a miscalculation by the president. Bullying an ally of ours makes us look weak. And when we are weak, we are less safe. The American people should make no mistake about that. What happened in the Oval Office was a complete and utter disaster. And it puts us in a much worse situation, not only with the Russians and the Ukrainians, but with our European allies.
So moving on, we've got another Republican senator speaking up in support of President Zelensky and Ukraine. This time it's Senator Lisa Murkowski. She tweeted, "This week started with administration officials refusing to acknowledge that Russia started the war in Ukraine. It ends with a tense, shocking conversation in the Oval Office and whispers from the White House that they may try to end all U.S. support for Ukraine. I know foreign policy is not for the faint of heart, but right now, I'm sick to my stomach as the administration appears to be walking away from our allies and embracing Putin, a threat to democracy and U.S. values around the world." So definitely a supportive statement by Senator Murkowski for Ukraine, but she's wrong about one thing here. The Trump administration never made any formal or informal comment which says that the U.S. is stopping aid to Ukraine. Now, I don't blame the senator for this mistake because this is Russia-backed propaganda and it was being spread all over Twitter by some Russian-backed accounts with millions of followers. These Russian accounts are basically spreading a clip of the U.S. press secretary all over the platform. It was all based on a tiny snippet of a quote that people didn't even listen to all the way through. Here's the clip.
And again, this is not the previous administration. Joe Biden is no longer in that Oval Office. We are no longer going to just write blank checks to a war very far away without real, lasting peace.
So basically, the press secretary's exact words were that the U.S. won't be writing blank checks to Ukraine without real and lasting peace. That's it. That was the exact quote, but people are misreading it and thinking that the U.S. is cutting off all of its aid to Ukraine. The Trump administration never made any comment about stopping aid to Ukraine, so anybody who's pushing this propaganda is purposefully pushing chaos to hurt the Ukrainian public. All right, moving on. So after the White House fiasco with Zelensky, Vice President Vance went on a ski trip to Vermont, and while his motorcade was passing through the streets, hundreds of protesters held signs in support of Ukraine. The whole sight was really satisfying. Watch this. Now, on top of this, we also had a huge protest at New York's Times Square. People showing support for Ukraine and President Zelensky and repeatedly chanting, "Thank you, America." Because after all, Vice President Vance told Zelensky that he should be thanking America for making this deal with Putin. Watch this.
Thank you, Americans! 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 Thank you, Americans!
And honestly speaking, I don't understand why during the White House meeting, Vice President Vance was so stuck on getting a thank you from Ukraine. Like, dude, as a senator, you voted against every single aid package for Ukraine. You didn't support any funding for Ukraine ever since the invasion started, so I don't know what exactly you're expecting here from Zelensky. Anyways, moving on. We've also got a clip of Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia explaining why President Trump shouldn't take sides with Putin, a dictator who just invaded another sovereign nation.
A very shameful display for all that to happen in the Oval Office, in front of the world and all of our allies who we need to stop Russia. And I think what honestly is most disgraceful is that throughout that conversation, that the president could not be clear that Putin is a danger to Europe, to Ukraine, and to the United States. Putin is an authoritarian dictator, and we need to call it like it is and to embarrass Zelensky, who is taking Putin on right now, to belittle him, an ally, and our efforts in Ukraine.
Let me just,
I think it's a mistake.
Now, according to the reports, even after leaving the White House and getting humiliated in front of all the press, President Zelensky's team was still trying to work things out with President Trump and his administration, maybe sign the mineral deal and figure out a way forward. But yeah, that didn't happen. So once it was clear there was no way back into the White House, Zelensky headed to the UK to meet with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And to be honest, the kind of reception he received from the UK's Prime Minister after all that Oval Office fiasco was actually surprising to me. Prime Minister Starmer didn't hold back on his support. He said, "We stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes." So those were definitely very welcoming words for Zelensky after whatever happened at the White House. Take a listen to Keir Starmer's speech.
We cannot accept a weak deal like Minsk, which Russia can breach with ease. Instead, any deal must be backed by strength. We will keep the military aid flowing and keep increasing the economic pressure on Russia to strengthen Ukraine now. We agreed that any lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and Ukraine must be at the table. In the event of a peace deal, we will keep boosting Ukraine's own defensive capabilities to deter any future invasion. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting.
Now, on top of this, French President Emmanuel Macron also tweeted in support of Ukraine. He said, "There is an aggressor, Russia. There is a victim, Ukraine. We were right to help Ukraine and sanction Russia 3 years ago and to keep doing so. By we, I mean the Americans, the Europeans, the Canadians, the Japanese, and many others. Thank you to all who have helped and continue to do so, and respect to those who have been fighting since the beginning because they're fighting for their dignity, their independence, their children, and the security of Europe." So this may come as a surprise to many of you, but guess who was the biggest supporter of Ukraine back in 2022? The man and the myth, President Donald Trump himself. Back in March 2022, when Putin started the invasion, Trump went live on Fox News and straight up called to arm Ukraine with U.S. weapons. And on top of that, he also said that the U.S. should send a nuclear submarine to the Russian coast to counter Putin's nuclear threats. Just listen to the old President Trump for yourself.
There's this discussion about whether we should send jets, MiG jets, to help the Ukrainian Air Force. Would you send in that kind of help?
Well, maybe even more, to be honest with you. And I'm the one that would have stayed out. I'm the one that would have stayed out. Let me just explain that Putin is saying things like, "Don't you dare send anything in." In the meantime, he's killing thousands and thousands of people. So he's acting like we're an aggressor. If we send in some old 44-year-old plane that probably gets shot out of the sky pretty quickly, and he's acting like we were terrible people if we do that. But he's killing tens of thousands of people, far more than they're reporting. You don't knock down those buildings and blow up those buildings and they say 2 people were injured slightly. And thousands of people are being killed. And when he says, "Don't you dare do that," and we all say, "Oh, he said don't do it, we don't want to start." The fact is that what he's doing is a human tragedy. There's not been anything like this, in a sense, maybe ever, but certainly since World War II when you look at it. But there's never been anything like this.
So what do you do now? If you said you'd maybe do more than just send in the MiG jets, all right? What more?
What I would do is we have tremendous military capability. And what we can do without planes, to be honest with you, without 44-year-old jets, what we can do is enormous, and we should be doing it, and we should be helping them to survive. And they're doing an amazing job. But, you know, I was the one that sent in the javelins. I mean, everyone refuses to acknowledge that, and I took a lot of heat. And I sent it in very openly and glowingly, and they said Obama sent blankets and Trump sent javelins. Well, nobody knew how well those javelins would do and how well they... But those javelins that knocked out all the tanks, those were sent by me, and we sent them in large numbers too. I didn't even realize at the time when I sent them, I said, "Man, you know, that's a lot of stuff we're sending, but let's do it. Let them have a chance." Who would have thought that they would have been so powerful, the way they protected that country, but they need other kinds of help. And one thing I do rapidly is I'd get the oil flowing, because if you reduce the price of oil significantly, that war is going to end. That war is going to end. You know the expression, what you need for war is three things: money, money, and money. And if you bring down the price of oil, and you could knock the hell out of the price, I had it down to $1.71 at one point. In fact, it was so low that I was afraid we were going to lose our oil company.
Well,
you got to get that oil down. And if you get the oil down, that war is going to end.
But let me press you again on what extra military help you would give to the Ukrainians. You say you want to do more than just the MiG jets or the Javelins. Yeah. What more?
Well, I think the drones are just as effective as anything nowadays. I mean, they make drones today. We have drones that are just as effective as just about anything in the air, anything you can do in the air. And you can do drones, plus they give back tremendous amounts of information, and the information leads missiles right to whatever the hell target they are, and you don't have to shoot them from Ukraine, so therefore you're being neutral. It's so ridiculous. Look, Stuart, when he goes in and he kills thousands of people, are we going to just sit by and watch? This country will be, in 100 years from now, they'll be talking about what a travesty, what a horrible thing this is. We can't let that, just on a human basis, we can't let that happen. And then he says that they're a nuclear power, but we're a greater nuclear power. I hated to do it, but I rebuilt our nuclear capability like nobody has ever thought even possible. $2.5 trillion in our military, and a big chunk of it went to nuclear and redoing it. We had 45-year-old and 50-year-old weapons that we didn't even know if they worked. Now we have brand new stuff that's immensely powerful, and hope to God you never have to use it, because that would be the tragedy of all tragedies. But if we didn't have it, we couldn't talk. But I listened to him constantly using the N-word. That's the N-word. And he's constantly using it, the nuclear word. And we never talk of, we say, oh, he's a nuclear power. But we're a greater nuclear power. We have the greatest submarines in the world, most powerful machines ever built. Most powerful, and they got built under me, most powerful machines ever built, and nobody knows where they are. And you should say, look, if you mention that word one more time, we're going to send them over, and we'll be coasting back and forth up and down your coast. You can't let this tragedy continue. You can't let these thousands of people die. It's going to be hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of people by the time it ends.
Now, just 2 days after the White House mess, NATO called an emergency meeting with Ukraine included. And guess what? The US wasn't invited. And as this meeting concluded, the UK's Prime Minister presented a 4-step formula in UK's Parliament, where he said that the UK is going to continue its military aid to Ukraine. Take a listen.
It's a plan that has 4 clear principles. First, that we must keep the military aid to Ukraine flowing. Keep increasing the economic pressure on Russia. And to that end, alongside our partnership on air defence, we're doubling down on military aid. Already this year, we've taken our support to record levels. But on Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. Second, Mr. Speaker, we agreed that any lasting peace must guarantee the sovereignty and security of Ukraine, and that Ukraine must be at the table when negotiating their future. That is absolutely vital. Third, we agreed that in the event of a peace deal, we will continue to boost Ukraine's defences and Ukraine's deterrence. And finally, fourth, we agreed to develop a coalition of the willing, ready to defend a deal in Ukraine and guarantee the peace. Mr. Speaker, after all, the Ukrainian position is completely understandable. For them, the war did not begin 3 years ago. That was merely the latest and most brutal escalation. They have signed agreements with Putin before. They've experienced the nature of his diplomacy and the calibre of his word. And as this House would expect, Britain will play a leading role. with, if necessary, and together with others, boots on the ground and planes in the air.
Now, watching all the European nations come together for Ukraine's support, Russian media seems to be getting worried. They're saying that the Union of European Armies won't be good for Russia. Take a listen.
Looking at all the statements from Merz and Hollande, dismiss them as unserious, as many here do. This is very serious. I understand that the European Union might repeat a scenario similar to the one once seen within pan-Europe, the Pact of 1933, Britain, Italy, France, and Germany, granting Germany the right to rearm and create a large European army. This is what this alliance of four might do. Repeat that experience. True, it was unsuccessful back in the 1930s, but the idea could very well be revived within the framework of the European Union. Therefore, I wouldn't dismiss these countries so lightly as many do here. These nations have a powerful military history and strong traditions. Not so long ago, they were among the strongest armies in the world, so we should not treat them with disdain or underestimate the threat they pose.
After meeting Zelensky at NATO's meeting, the Canadian Prime Minister also uploaded a video message on his Twitter handle. Take a listen.
In 2014, Russia chose to invade Ukraine, to occupy Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine. For that, they were kicked out of the G7. And in 2022, they chose to violate the existing ceasefire and invaded Ukraine with the intention of taking Kyiv in 3 days and the entire country in 3 weeks. That has failed. On Friday in the Oval Office, President Zelensky pointed out, in so many words, that Vladimir Putin is a liar and a criminal and cannot be trusted to keep his word in any way, shape, or form, because he has demonstrated time and time again that he will break any agreements. I stand with Vladimir Zelensky, and I stand with the people of Ukraine.
Now, before ending this video, I'm going to play an important clip from Fox News where the anchor raises a serious point about President Trump. Listen to this.
I do think that it's important to consider the fact that this quote-unquote peace deal that he's offering means that Zelensky essentially cedes his country to Russia. And no one has explained what the sudden change in the last couple of weeks and the way that Donald Trump is talking about Ukraine and Zelensky is spurred by. He didn't used to call Zelensky a dictator. He didn't used to say that his people hated him. He didn't used to say he had a 4% approval rating. He didn't used to say any of the total blasphemy that he's been throwing out there the last few weeks. Elon Musk also on Twitter a couple days ago saying, I agree, to someone who said that the U.S. should get out of NATO and the UN. These are all things that Putin wants to hear. And you know that because his own spokesman, Peskov, said as much, said the rapidly changing U.S. foreign policy configurations largely coincides with our vision. Dmitry Medvedev, the insolent pig about Zelensky, finally got a proper slapdown in the Oval Office. Trump is right. The Kyiv regime is gambling with World War III. So if you are satisfying someone that we all agree is a dictator and authoritarian to that level, don't you think maybe the methods aren't that great?